All right, so get this. Today we're diving deep, like way deep, into this debate that's been stirring up the literary world. It's all about this idea of literary justice. It kind of makes you think.
Hmm.
Like, have you ever, found yourself wondering if, like, where an author comes from or their background kind of colors how you see their work?
Yeah, I can see that.
That's exactly what we're going to tackle head on today.
Hey.
Should we be judging a book like purely on its artistic merit, how good it actually is? Or does the author's like identity, their background, their beliefs, does all that stuff kind of factor into the equation?
It's a huge question. It really forces us to look in the mirror a bit, examine our own maybe biases and what we assume about art and equality. Like, can we really separate the art from the person who made it?
Right. And
Yeah.
should we even try?
Exactly.
Okay, so to help us navigate this pretty complex terrain,
Yeah.
we're turning to the work of the late great literary critic Harold Bloom, and we're going to be looking specifically at his idea, his concept of the school of resentment.
Right.
Now, Bloom he argued that sometimes, and this is kind of controversial, sometimes those political agendas, you know,
Mm-hmm.
can overshadow like the actual quality of the writing.
Yeah, Bloom was really about the power of a writing itself. He thought good writing, truly great writing, goes beyond, transcends the author's background.
I see. Yeah.
And he worried, actually, that if we focus too much on identity politics, that could actually maybe make literature less impactful and even potentially hurt the same groups it's supposed to be helping.
Wow, that's it's a lot to unpack there. And to really see this in action, we've got this really head-scratching case study, right?
Yeah.
It's the story of Michael Derrick Hudson. He's this poet who, get this, he decided to use a Chinese pseudonym to try and get his work published.
Interesting.
Yeah, talk about a twist in the tale.
Yeah, it makes you think about how we see art and how we decide what's good. Does who we think the author is change how their work is received? I mean, Hudson's story seems to say that, yeah, maybe it does.
So let's dive into the specifics here. Get down to the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
So Hudson, he sends out his poems,
Yeah.
right, under his real name.
Right.
And what happens? Rejection after rejection after rejection.
Hmm.
But then he puts on this mask, so to speak, right? He becomes Yi Fen Chao.
Ethan Chow.
And all of a sudden, boom, those same poems, they're getting snatched up. And one of them even lands a spot in the super prestigious Best American Poetry Anthology. It's like, what?
Wow.
Yeah, hard to believe.
And here's the thing, it gets even more interesting. The editor of that anthology, Sherman Alexie, straight up admitted that he picked Hudson's poem because he thought the author was Chinese American.
Wow.
He wanted to, promote diversity and thought a writer from a background that's not often heard would bring something unique to the table.
So we're seeing this literary justice play out in like real life, this attempt to, I don't know, maybe level the playing field a bit and give those authors from, groups that have been marginalized, give them a boost. Sounds good on the surface, right?
Yeah, it does.
But Bloom, he'd say, even good intentions, even the best intentions, can sometimes backfire, have those unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's when he brings up this term, this school of resentment, describe it. And he was worried it could, actually lower literary standards and kind of stifle creativity.
So Bloom, he's really big on judging literature by its quality, like how well written it is, how moving it is, and not on who wrote it. He was worried that like this intense focus on identity could actually trap writers, make them feel like they have to fit into some box instead of just letting their own unique voices come through.
Absolutely. Bloom thought writers from minority groups, or really all writers, should have the freedom to explore whatever theme or style they want without feeling like they have to represent a specific identity or tell a certain kind of story. He felt like that pressure could stifle their creativity and actually hold them back.
And to kind of push back against that, Bloom, he was a strong advocate for going back to what he called the Western canon, right? This body of work that he saw as like the best, the peak of literary achievement, no matter who wrote it.
Right.
He thought that, really immersing ourselves in these works could help us appreciate literature, like the art of it,
Yeah, the craft.
Yeah, the craft of it, without getting bogged down in identity politics.
And it's important to note that, Bloom's Western canon, it wasn't about excluding anyone. It includes writers from all different backgrounds and time periods. What united them was how brilliant their work was. He saw it as this, ever-changing conversation, always growing and being enriched by new voices.
Okay, so let's unpack this school of resentment idea a bit more. What exactly did Bloom mean by that term, and what were the potential downsides he saw in this whole approach?
Well, Bloom was really concerned that putting identity ahead of artistic merit could lead to a kind of reverse discrimination. He worried that authors from certain backgrounds might get chosen, even if their work wasn't necessarily the best.
So are we saying that trying to be more inclusive, that could actually create a new kind of bias? That's kind of hard to grasp.
It is complicated, and Bloom felt that this approach, even with the best intentions, could end up hurting the very groups it was trying to help. He argued that if a writer's success is mostly because of their identity, not the quality of their work, it kind of undermines the whole idea of artistic excellence and, being rewarded for being good at what you do.
And this brings us back to Hudson. By using that Chinese pseudonym, he was, in a way, calling out the potential for bias in publishing. Like, he was shining a light on the very system he was part of, right?
Exactly. It really shows how tangled up this issue is. We want more diversity, we want to make sure everyone's voice is heard, but we also don't want to compromise on quality or create a system where writers feel like they have to play to certain expectations based on who they are. It's a tricky balancing act.
So how do we even begin to navigate this? How do we find that balance between, like, representation and making sure the art is good? What would Bloom say about, hitting that sweet spot?
That's the million-dollar question. Bloom would probably say we need to go back to focusing on the work itself. He believed the best way to fight bias is to judge art based on its own merits, no matter who made it. Let the work speak for itself.
It sounds like he wanted us to, like, strip everything away and just go back to the text, let the words stand on their own without getting caught up in who the author is. But is that even possible? Can we really separate the art from the artist like that?
That is the heart of the debate. And it's something we'll keep exploring as we dive deeper into Bloom's ideas and what literary justice really means.
So it kind of feels like we're stuck in this, I don't know, like a paradox.
Okay.
We want to recognize, the artist's unique point of view, where they're coming from, all their experiences. But then on the other hand, there's this risk that we end up judging their work only through, like, the lens of their identity. How do we even start to untangle that?
Well, he would argue that the context, while important, shouldn't overshadow the art itself. He believed that real equality, true equality, meant judging everybody by the same standard no matter their background.
So if we take that and apply it to Hudson's case, are we saying it doesn't matter that he used that Chinese pseudonym? That the only thing that should matter is whether the poems themselves were actually good enough to be published? I mean, that seems kind of harsh, doesn't it?
Well, that's the core of it all, isn't it? It forces us to ask ourselves, can we really separate the art from the person who made it, the creator from the creation?
Yeah.
And if we can, what does that mean for both the artist and the people experiencing the art?
It's tough because, let's face it, art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by, well, everything about the artist.
Yeah.
Their experiences, how they see the world, their identity. It's all part of it. We can't just pretend that doesn't matter, right?
You're right, you can't just erase it. And recognizing that context can actually make us understand and appreciate the work even more. But Bloom would say, don't let that become the only way you see it.
So it's all about that balance, right?
Mhm.
Seeing where the artist is coming from, but not letting that completely define how we see their art.
Yes, exactly. And that's where being able to think critically is so important. We have to be aware of our own biases, really engage with the work, and be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
It's like, instead of getting stuck on who wrote this, we should be asking, what are they trying to say with this? And how well are they doing it?
Precisely. And that's where Bloom's focus on the Western canon comes in. He believed that if we immerse ourselves in great literature, from different times and cultures, it helps us develop a more sophisticated and discerning approach to art in general.
I got to admit, when I hear Western canon, it kind of makes me feel intimidated. It sounds like this exclusive club with all these old, complicated books you need, like a PhD to understand. Am I way off here?
Not at all. It's totally understandable to feel that way. But Bloom wasn't pushing for a narrow or elitist view of literature. He saw the canon as this, vibrant conversation that's always evolving, always welcoming new voices no matter where they come from. The one thing that unites them is a dedication to excellence.
So when Bloom talks about the Western canon, he's not just talking about, dead white guys.
No, not at all. He loved writers like Toni Morrison, Jorge Luis Borges, Virginia Woolf, right alongside Shakespeare and Dante. His point was great literature, it breaks down those categories of identity. It speaks to, universal human experiences, emotions that we all share.
It's about the power of the story itself, no matter who's telling it.
Exactly. And that's why he felt studying the canon was so important. It exposes us to all these different perspectives and styles. It sharpens our critical thinking. And ultimately, it helps us understand ourselves and the world around us better.
It's like he saw the canon as this masterclass in empathy, but told through, the written word.
Precisely. And it reminds us that literature can build bridges, create connections that wouldn't exist otherwise. It's powerful stuff.
So let's go back to Michael Derrick Hudson and his, well, let's be honest, his controversial choice to use that Chinese pseudonym. Do you think he was right to do what he did?
That's a tough one. It's important to try to understand where he was coming from. It seems pretty clear that he wasn't trying to, trick anyone for his own benefit. He wanted to expose that potential for bias in publishing, make a statement about the system itself.
Yeah, it's almost like he was doing a social experiment, like shining a light on these hidden things that are at play.
Exactly. And it definitely got people talking, started a conversation that needed to happen. It forced people to really confront their own assumptions about race and literature and ask, is the system really fair? It had a real impact.
What do you think Bloom would have thought about what Hudson did? Would he have, given him a high five for his guts or criticized the way he went about it?
Ooh, that's interesting. I think Bloom might have seen Hudson's case as an example of the very problem he was warning about. Putting too much emphasis on identity and not enough on the art itself.
Okay.
He might have said that even though Hudson had good intentions, what he did actually reinforced the idea that where a writer comes from matters more than how good their writing is. It's a complicated legacy to think about.
But on the other hand, what Hudson did also brought to light the very real biases that exist in the publishing world. It's like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Absolutely, and that's a conversation we need to keep having. How do we build a system that's fair and inclusive, that supports different voices without sacrificing quality? It's a challenge.
It feels like there's no easy answer, no magic bullet here.
True. But it's worth talking about, worth wrestling with. The stakes are high. Literature shapes how we see ourselves and the world. It's so important that we create a space where everyone can be heard, where everyone is judged on their own merits, not on who we think they are.
So where do we go from here? What does all of this mean for us as readers and for the future of literature?
I think Bloom would encourage us to be thoughtful readers, to be aware of our own biases, and to come to literature with an open mind, ready to think critically. He believed the best weapon against prejudice is education and being exposed to lots of different perspectives.
It's about celebrating all those different experiences, all that complexity of being human in all its, messy and beautiful form.
Exactly. And that's what great literature does. It lets us walk in someone else's shoes, see the world through their eyes, and that helps us understand, on a deeper level, what it means to be human.
And that's a powerful thing to carry with us. So it's like we're constantly being pulled in these two different directions. On one hand, we want to acknowledge who the author is, their identity, but on the other hand, we should be focusing on the art itself. Is there a way to find that middle ground? Can we appreciate both without one taking over?
That's the real challenge, right? Bloom really believed that to truly appreciate art, we got to engage with it on its own terms. Let the work speak for itself, without bringing in all our own preconceived ideas or agendas.
But isn't there, a danger in separating the art completely from the artist? Doesn't that kind of erase the very experiences and perspectives that make the work meaningful in the first place?
I see your point. We can't just pretend that art exists in some bubble, totally separate from context or influences. But Bloom would say, yeah, knowing about the artist's background can add to our understanding. But it shouldn't become the only way we look at their work. We got to be careful not to reduce the art to just a reflection of who the artist is.
So it's back to that balance again, huh? See the context, but don't let it take over. But how do we do that as readers? How do we make sure we're not letting our own biases slip in without even realizing it?
Bloom would say it's all about building a critical eye, being able to really think about the work and question our own assumptions. It's about asking, what's this work trying to say? How well are they saying it? Instead of just focusing on who wrote this, what's their deal?
It sounds like he was pushing for a more objective way to look at art. One that puts how good the work actually is above who created it. But can we ever really be objective when it comes to art? Isn't what we see always influenced by our own experiences and views?
That's the debate that never ends, right? Can we ever really get rid of our biases? Bloom thought that maybe perfect objectivity isn't possible, but we can try to be more balanced and nuanced in how we see art. He thought that if we immerse ourselves in a lot of different literature especially those works in the Western canon, we can start to see things with a more discerning eye, an eye that isn't as easily swayed by, identity politics or personal prejudices.
So it's like by reading more, by experiencing works from different times and places, we can start to see past our own limited view and appreciate art on a more, I don't know, universal level. It's about recognizing that shared human experience that connects us, even when we're different.
Exactly. And that's the ultimate power of literature, right? It can go beyond those boundaries of identity and experience. It helps us understand each other, build empathy. It reminds us of what we have in common as humans.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into literary justice, let's leave our listeners with this question.
Mhm.
Can we really have a fair and equal literary world if we only focus on how good the work is? Or will the author's identity always play a part in how we see and judge their work? It's something that forces us to look at our own biases, talk about these things honestly, and try to understand art and artists in a more nuanced and inclusive way.
It's a conversation that's going to keep going, probably for generations, and it's one that we all have a part in shaping.
Well, that's it for today, folks. We've really dug into literary justice, explored Bloom's idea of the school of resentment, and wrestled with Michael Derek Hudson and his decision to use that Chinese pseudonym. It's been a real thought-provoking journey, and we hope it's got you thinking and maybe sparked some lively discussions of your own. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.